Deputy Connolly.
Fáilte róh agus gur míle maithagad as an túrascáil bliantúil a scoilge gur míle maithagad tá éag géint agad. I'm going to come back to those points, but I'm going to start with the accounts. And the Controller and Auditor General has given you a clear. He says that the accounts are properly presented and so on. But he does raise one issue in relation to procurement. And given that it's the Department of the Taoiseach, there's a particular onus on you to show example. So if you could deal with the 4 contracts that were given outside of the procurement guidelines.
I'll just find that now. All right.
Page 3.
A point of information, Deputy. This is contained in the Statement on Internal Financial Control, so it's actually Mr. Fraser's reporting of the matter rather than my reporting of it.
Okay, thank you. Just for the clarification. It's on page 3 of your
bottom of page 3 EG. No, I have it here. So there were 4 of them. One is the e-cabinet system, which is essentially a system which was developed some time ago now, which is used for government meetings and government memos and agendas and so on.
What does that mean, a cabinet system?
So it's the computer system that the government uses, that the cabinet uses. So it manages all the agendas, all the memorandums for government, the decisions, the whole process around government is managed. There's an electronic system which you would have seen ages ago. They would have had screens in front of them at cabinet. Now it's gone a bit more modern, but that's what that is. So we have a sort of a long-standing contract with one company, and really nobody else can do that work. That's essentially why that was done. That's a sort of a, they built that system themselves, so that's what that is.
What's the value of that one?
403. I'm just reading from
403.
403,000. Yeah.
For the contract.
Per annum.
Per annum, yeah.
In 2016. Yeah, 403 in 2016.
Broadly speaking, it's every year, isn't it?
There's upgrades going on at the moment, yeah.
So it's a bit more.
There's an upgrade going on at the moment.
Just of the 4 contracts, the total figure for the 4 contracts here by your own note is 643,939, and of that 403,000 plus. 400
is for the maintenance of the cabinet computer system.
Without tender.
Well, it's not so much without tender. Nobody else can do it.
Just explain to me.
I know.
It's without tender. Am I wrong then?
There was a tender to build the system, but the people who built it are the only ones who can maintain it. The company that got it,
you're rolling it over?
Yeah.
Okay.
The second one is telephonists, and from now on we have a framework with the OGP. There's just a couple of people who run the switch in the Taoiseach's department.
Yes.
The third one was a tribunal engaged somebody directly, that's 54,000. And the last one is the newspapers, which, to be honest with you, I can't see how newspapers can cost any different from anybody else, but we have, nevertheless, I think we've already tendered, for newspapers. So it's
what does that mean? Can you clarify that?
So we basically used to get the newspapers off one of the news agents
in
Leeson Street, wasn't there somewhere?
Yeah. Near Hollis Street.
Yeah, near Hollis Street. So a local news agent used to send us in the newspapers. So we didn't tender for that because the newspapers are all the same price. But anyway, we've tendered now. I suspect they're still the same price. But that's
go back to the major contract.
It's cheaper, yeah. We got money off the newspapers.
Just the major contract that you rolled over, when you're ready. The major contract that you rolled over. How do you know you can't get anybody else?
Because
the reason I'm putting this in context, it comes up every single week with every single organisation.
No, I know that. I know that. So it's just they built the system. We're a very small department, as you know. And if you break up everything we do, 200 people, if you break it into all the different things we do, you're talking about single figures of people in any given part of the organisation. So we contracted out at the time e-cabinet was built to this company, and they are essentially the only people who can maintain it. It's their proprietary software.
Yeah, it's an interesting concept now that I'd like to come back to sometime, this proprietary, because the health board, they go for a particular, the health executive go for a particular type of thing. Very little competition, one group getting it. So in this famous free market, we're getting reduced competition all of the time. So That's your answer for today. You can get nobody else.
My answer to your general point is that we always would tender, and you should tender.
Yeah. And in this case, we
did tender.
No, just let me. You did tender originally. You got somebody, and then that person owns this. They're proprietary.
Well, they're the only people who can upgrade it. Yeah. So we have to keep using them.
Certainly the issue is it's a very serious issue in something like the health sector, defence spending, anywhere where there's specialised equipment. I think the important thing when you decide to use a particular system is to look at it on a whole of life basis, so that let's say when you're originally selecting somebody to build a system for you or to customise something, you take into account that we're going to use this for 10 years. You should be factoring into the evaluation and the business case for it, the fact that it's going to be 10 years, the fact that you'll be paying maintenance, that there will be an annual licence and so on. So you can approach the value for money at the beginning. I think what very often happens then is that at the end of 10 years you continue to use the system. And so every year you need to be thinking about, is it now time to look again and to move to a new system? Technologies move on and so on. So it certainly is something that's worth thinking about. Where a serious mistake could be made is where somebody looks at, let's say, a 3-year contract for something, and then the maintenance costs become exorbitant, but you're locked into the system, and you've got a fairly major capital expense to incur to change it. So taking a long-term perspective on something like a technology system is certainly necessary.
Thank you.
I would say, Deputy, if we tried to replace it, I'm not sure we'd have the money. I don't know what it would cost.
I'm not.
And I know that's not the point you're making.
No. Well, there is a point I'm making that I have serious concerns in relation to. I'm no expert. It's not my area at all. But from people making representations to me, so I think the Controller General has given a very good outline of it. So I leave it for now. That's all I can do for now at the moment. I want to come back then to the claims, and I had it marked here and it's been answered, I think, the commissions, why they come under E, because last week we had the Department of Finance and we had the Moriarty Tribunal. That was 70 million. I think was the figure, was it last week? Almost 70.
I had 65.
65, yeah, and I think it's going to go up. There's still outstanding payments, I think. But that's why these ones.
Yeah, what happens with, I think, both tribunals, certainly with commissions investigation, there's always a responsible minister, and in general we have to, it has to go to a minister whose department's not involved, and that's why we end up with a lot of these.
All right. So you made a very good comment in relation to looking at costs, but that people are also very important. It was Judge Hamilton who made the comment way back that if questions were put in the Dáil and answered, we wouldn't have needed the Beef Tribunal at the time. And certainly in my limited experience in 2 years, if questions were put properly and answered properly, we wouldn't need them. So if we go now to the State's Claims Agency, which you kindly outlined, and I asked in the Dáil on Tuesday, how many cases, other than Vicky, the Vicky Phelan case, how many? I got no answer. Now, that's Tuesday. It's one very practical example. And you might say, I'm not here to answer those, Deputy Connolly. But actually you are, because it's all about governance structures. Either they're in place and they're not operated, or they're not in place at all. So, in relation, I asked specifically, I asked about the State's Claims Agency. I asked what reporting mechanism there was. And subject to checking the record, I think I was told that was an independent body. Now, there has to be a learning mechanism. It's absolutely all right to give somebody independence in relation to cases. There has to be a reporting mechanism back. What reporting mechanism is there for reporting back? You said quarterly reports, is that right? Okay, have you any input into those quarterly reports? Nothing.
No.
But there is a mechanism for the State Claims Agency to come back and say, these are the cases?
Yeah.
Is there a learning mechanism?
Well, I mean, obviously, Deputy, I don't know the circumstances of your question on Tuesday, but in general, I mean, what I think should happen is that the departments concerned and the state claims agencies should always be looking at these things and making sure that they're thinking about them and learning from them.
And have you any knowledge of that in terms of learning? You're the Department of the Taoiseach, you're the Secretary General.
Well, we don't, I think, have many legal cases.
That's okay. No, I'm trying to see what input. You see, if we're trying to avoid and we're heading down the role of an independent investigation, I fully support that. And I think it's very good to do a scoping exercise first, because we simply do not have the facts. And the reason we don't have the facts is because there's a complete lack of accountability with the various organisations. We have no report before us. At the very least, 9 days after, we should have a written report as TDs to say, this is what happened, so on. Nothing outlined. So, back to the State's Claims Agency. Where is the learning mechanism in the Department of An Taoiseach in relation to learning, to avoid tribunals, so that they can go into the Dáil informed?
Well, as I say, I don't think we have any cases with the State Claims Agency.
Okay, so
I don't think we do.
There are serious implications for the Department of An Taoiseach in relation to the information being given in the Dáil. Isn't that right? In relation to this?
I think you mean, well, I think you mean that there are serious implications for the Taoiseach, the government.
Serious implications for the Taoiseach coming into the Dáil with not enough information.
Yeah.
Have you any role in that, or your department?
Sometimes we do and sometimes we don't.
Did you have any role in this particular?
Not
I
especially.
don't like the word debacle. This.
No, not. No is the answer to that. Okay. I think most of the information is coming from the health service.
Or not coming.
Or not coming.
Okay. Now, in relation to just again on governance.
Because you mentioned the tribunals that end up in your department, and I'll just make this immediate observation and scoping inquiry. But on the face of what we've seen so far, if there is to be a tribunal, it will be under your department. I would say the Department of Health will probably be subject of the inquiry. The Department of Finance, because of the handling of the State Claims Agency, will also have to be examined, the State Claims Agency. So the Department of An Taoiseach is the only one that has had no involvement. Finance, State Claims Agency involved, Health is involved. So I would have said, by definition, neither of those ministers are the appropriate people to be heading up an inquiry or a tribunal, whatever the case is going to be eventually. So it will probably fall back to you as accounting officer to account for this that comes down the road, because I think you see the logic in what I'm saying. I can't see any other department that can actually take this tribunal if it's to happen, or a commission or whatever. So what we would say to you is, you've been through what was most disappointing. One issue here, you can't put a final estimate in relation to the outstanding costs in relation to that first tribunal of inquiry. You know, you have to wait until it comes in, but somebody must be handling it and know how many cases are still outstanding, an estimate of what's out there. You mightn't have a figure, but I would hope that if your department and your accounting officer are going to be responsible for a future tribunal or commission of investigation, that you would put a good system in place on this matter, the costing and financing of it, before it's up and running, and not be here in your successor and my successor here in 10 years' time still saying we don't really know how much that thing that happened 10 years ago is going to cost. That's not good enough for public confidence and the finance side. That's just an observation. But you take the point. You have an opportunity before a next one comes across your desk to have a more robust system in place than we've had in the previous ones. That's all I say.
Just to briefly comment on that, Chairman, and what Deputy Connolly says. So I know only what I read in the papers, and I didn't read too many papers this morning because I was coming here at 9 o'clock, but as I understand it, the Minister for Health met opposition spokespersons last night, and they've agreed on a process. Scoping. So I'm not privy to the outcome of that.
We know that.
But I do think, first of all, the most important thing is the women concerned and how they're dealt with. But I think the scope inquiry is good, because I think where these things go wrong is if people don't think very carefully about the terms of reference, who does it, how it's been dealt with. And as I said earlier on to Deputy Cullinan, speed is important and cost is helpful. Actually, to be honest with you, the quicker you do it, the cheaper it is. That's almost certainly the case. But also, there are different methods, and I think, particularly in the one we're talking about, which, as I say, is entirely unconnected with the purpose of this committee meeting. I think it's a very good idea to think very, very carefully about this so we get the right combination of speed, transparency, and particularly that the victims are at the centre of it. So
back to Deputy. The only little observation I disagree with it, it's very relevant to the subject matter of today's meeting because we have 4 tribunals of inquiry and commissions.
I appreciate the principle,
this is
Chair.
about learning from those
absolutely.
for any future.
No, I agree. I'm just saying that the particular matter under investigation isn't.
But the principle of setting up these things is kind of on today's
they are, as everyone knows, the terms of reference will be determined by the Oireachtas.
Correct.
You know, so
and you'll have to implement it. We understand that. Or whichever accounting officer is given the job.
I didn't know it was coming.
That's right.
Okay, just let me stick with my train of thought here, because I'm not going down the road of a tribunal at this point. I'm looking at processes, because that's our role here. And just to give an example, we sat here with the Project Eagle. In my opinion, there would have been no need for the Cook inquiry had answers been given. A very good report was done by the Controller and Auditor General, a very moderate report, in my opinion, highlighting issues, simply highlighting issues, and the system didn't deal with that. And we've gone down the road of inquiry. We sat here for the Grace case, 3 reports by a health board. So processes absolutely not up to scratch, and even when they were in place, not being implemented. Now, it's important to mention this, because I'm coming to the Strategic Communications Unit now in a second, in terms of processes and accountability. So when I hear officials talk about speed, absolutely, of necessity, but the question is, how do we end up with tribunals? And that's the question for each department and each General Secretary. So I'm going back now again to the State Claims Agency, which Deputy Sherry has raised already, and which I raised in the Dáil in relation to it. You, as the Department of the Taoiseach, have absolutely no knowledge of any cases in relation to the cervical smear issue.
I mean, I don't have any knowledge. I had no knowledge, but that's, I mean, it doesn't arise under the accounts or anything like that. So, but I mean, if you're asking me, did I have any knowledge of it? No, I didn't.
No knowledge. Okay. So if we go to the Strategic Communications Unit, and thank you for all the documents, and they're very informative. But what I don't see before me is any document leading to the decision. Was there a document leading to the decision, a business case setting out?
Yeah, there was a memorandum for the government in September.
No, sorry, no. Was there a document with a business case setting out the need for the Strategic Communication Unit?
Yeah, it was in the memorandum for the government.
Oh, we don't have that?
No.
Okay, so I have no documents before.
Again, we don't have it?
You don't have the memorandum for the government for obvious reasons. It's confidential. But the substance of that memorandum is in my report and in Ms. Canavan's report.
Oh, no, just 1 second. You see, every week we're here with various universities, third level, and we're looking at the absence of business cases generally, absence of lots of other things. What was the business case for the Strategic Communications Unit? And your answer to that is it was in a memo to the government. Is that your answer? Sorry.
No, it's not my... Well, it's partly my answer. I mean, if you mean the actual business case, it's in a memorandum for the government. But
I do mean the actual business case. Yeah. That's exactly what I do mean.
Yeah, well then, it's in the memorandum for the government. But it is in my report.
Just 1 second now. Just 1 second. We're on a Public Accounts Committee and we're looking at documents, and I try to stick to the issues. And so a Strategic Communications Unit is set up, presumably on the basis of business case, but we don't have a copy of that business case.
Well, you have a copy of the business case that was given, I think, to the Department of Expenditure, but it was set up because the Taoiseach wanted it set up as government policy.
No, that's okay. So, but the Taoiseach, I can't say whether that was a good decision or bad decision, because I don't have a copy of the business case on the Public Accounts Committee. So now you're telling us it's been wound down, the spin unit has spun itself out. Isn't that right?
I'm not saying that.
Yeah. I'm saying it. It has spun... It has
a new name.
It has metamorphosed, so, rather than spun itself out.
Well, it's been wound down.
Okay, so let's just try and stick to the issue, because I want to get to housing.
It might be helpful. We have on the screen the letter from Robert Watt about the business case.
I have read all the letters.
Okay, thanks.
I'm blue in the face reading the stuff. It's a sad life to be on the Public Accounts Committee, I have to tell you. You might think it's difficult on that side. But a unit is set up, and now the unit is being dismantled. But surely it should be dismantled on the basis of it's not complying with its objectives, or the business case wasn't sound in the first place. Was the business case sound in the first place?
I think the business case was sound in the first place, but the reasons, and I gave them in my report, the reasons. Firstly, it was basically getting in the way of far more important things that the department had to do.
Does that mean that the publicity around it was taking up too much of your time? Is that when you say it was taking up too much time?
All of the dealing with all of the publicity and all of the political controversy was taking up far too much time. Yeah, we, as opposed to what we should be doing, which is far more important things than that. I find that difficult,
because if you have a business case that's sound, then that business case should stand. And it shouldn't be wound down or spun out or changed just because there's political pressure. It should be based on solid, solid reasons.
And a lot of the work that's in the business case will continue, but some of the stuff will not continue. But that was my recommendation, Deputy.
Well, I have to say, Mr. Fraser, I'm most unhappy with that. If there's a need for a communications unit, and I certainly was outspoken in relation to it during the budget, that's not for here. But then a business case sets out why it's needed, what's going to be saved, and then a decision made on the basis of that. Now, there was a high monitoring group set up, was there? The CSMB.
There was a group that only met once or twice to sort of...
Well, let me just ask my question. A Civil Service Management Board was set up to oversee this. Is that right?
The Civil Service Management Board exists anyway. There was a subgroup set up to oversee, if you like, the reform of communications.
The mechanism for oversight of the Strategic Communications Unit is a subcommittee of Secretaries General from the CSMB, which acts as a high-level working group. So it was set up to monitor it, presumably. Yes.
Well,
did it
It met, I think, once or maybe twice. It didn't meet that often in the time that...
Isn't that a problem with governance?
Well, not really. I mean, I think if it was meeting every couple of months, that would have been fine, and we'd probably have to continue because some of the work that was to be done is going to continue. But I don't think it's fair to suggest that that group was overseeing it. It didn't really get going. That was the structure was put in place, but the thing only lasted a few months, really.
I've looked at the media. Can you just clarify something for me? And I just want one last question on housing, just in relation to an email here, Appendix 2, Media Force email to regional newspapers. Can you just place it's provided by the editor, and Shane is the person at the bottom of it. Can you just place that in context for me? Appendix 2, Media Force email to regional newspapers.
Page 27.
39 in mine, but there's two copies. There are two copies.
Oh, Appendix 2, there's two emails.
Yeah.
So that is an email sent by Media Force to the regional newspapers, which was provided to us by the editor of one of those newspapers.
And it was sent by Media Force, who acted for the company PhD, who was your acting for you. Is that right?
I think that's right.
An unfortunate choice of name, PhD. You know, it seems to be. But in any event, so it's PhD Media Group. PhD is acting for communications unit.
I even get confused about the detail of this, Deputy, but Media Force anyway were acting on behalf of the government, the department.
They were acting on behalf of PhD, and PhD were acting on behalf of the...
Yeah, I think that's right,
yeah. And so they write this letter, and you see the bottom of the letter. I understand that this is an unusual project. However, I really need us to do a good job on this, as I believe if we do, there should be more to come on this project, and indeed other issues such as Brexit in the coming weeks and months. Interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Are you happy with that sentence?
Well, I didn't write that sentence.
No. What do you think of that sentence?
I don't know. This is the world of media and advertising.
World of media and advertising. This is the world now that the spin unit engaged to go out and lessen the distinction between news and advertisements. Isn't that right?
Well,
isn't that what happened? Do you agree that's what happened? The distinction between news as... Well, I mean, they set out to do advertorials, and as I said in
earlier on in my report, the outcome was unsatisfactory because some of the stuff that appeared shouldn't have appeared, and that's one of the reasons that we're going to wind it down.
Yeah.
So I'm not tremendously comfortable with this, Deputy, to be honest with you. No, I'm not.
No, that's good. Okay, because I'm not very comfortable with it either, because this plan was never discussed in the Dáil. Do you know that? This plan wasn't actually the final plan. The changes made, never discussed in the Dáil.
The overall Project Ireland plan.
Prior. So we have a plan that has huge implications for the country, never discussed in the Dáil, and then it's sold by way of spin. I see my own town, my own city, the university, the Taoiseach was going there to spin it. It wasn't to use the university to question, which is an interesting. None of this was used for the papers to question the document, to say what was good and bad. It was to spin the document. Now, if there isn't a crisis there for democracy, I don't know where there's a crisis. Government money to spin a story, not to use our third-level institutions to question, not to use the media to question, but to use the media to spin. Very serious. Last question, because the Chair is looking at me, is housing and your open statement. What role have you in housing? Your open statement talks about...
Yeah, and I think I was referring to 2016, but the Department's involved in most things that are a sort of priority to the Taoiseach, and in housing, I suppose mainly in support of the Cabinet Committee, which is now on infrastructure, probably at the time was dealing with housing.
Well, just the Department continue to engage in national priority issues, which is important, as directed, such as housing and homelessness. What's your role in housing and homelessness?
So, as I say, mainly as we provide secretary to the Cabinet Committee on, it's now infrastructure, which would deal with housing matters. So there's a Cabinet Committee that deals with housing.
So it's just practical assistance, is it?
No, well, it's that and more.
What's the more part?
Well, we try and influence policy, and we try and bring the system together.
You try and influence policy?
Yeah.
Okay. And in terms of talking about homelessness or dealing with homelessness, how do you influence the policy there?
Well, we're not the main influencer on policy there. It's mainly the Department of Housing and the Department of
Public Expenditure. No, I understand all that. I was just struck by it. My interest again is a city where there's a huge housing crisis, worse than Dublin actually. Yeah. Worse than Dublin. And so on the ground, we have representation. Just last week, a couple with a 4-week-old baby who's in getting respite in an apartment accommodation, being moved out on Sunday back to a hotel. That's policy. That's the policy of the organisation on the ground. A little bit of respite for her in an apartment, back to a hotel room where she can't even sterilise the bottles. So that's just an example where I'm coming from on the ground. So what's your role? If it's not just help, what other role have you in foreign policy?
Well, as I say, we engage with other departments and we support the Taoiseach and ministers in the Cabinet Committee structure, and we try and work to try and help solve these problems. Well, we're not.
I'll come back to it. I'm run out of time. I come back. Sorry, I beg your pardon. No, you're trying to answer it, and I'm not phrasing it right, so I'll come back to it.
Okay. Now.